He looks so tiny. How tall is he?
I don't know.
This guy is so big. 350 pounds. I thought that was Nick.
It is.
Down there.
No, on the bottom.
On the bottom. Oh. The little guy. But the other guy behind. The little guy.
Oh, I was rolling. And oh my god.
I never saw such fear in his eyes. So he found it.
He's trying.
Can I ask you to be mindful of this guy? Oh, can I maybe just scoot over 6 inches or so? That'd be great. Thank you so much. Sorry about that.
I can't focus.
Try to get it to stay on the microphone this time.
Yeah, I did, yeah. I said at least don't abort it completely, because...
No, they're using that in that room when I brought the stand.
Oh, you did? Oh, I see.
Yeah, we brought it. It was upstairs in the room.
Well, I got to tell the people upstairs to stay with their mic too.
Well, I'm trying to put it right in front of their face so that
Is there one upstairs now?
there's not a lavalier, there's a hardwire on a
Yeah,
stand.
yeah.
As long as it's aiming at them right near the podium, that's generally where they'll be because their laptops are right there. So they
Okay,
can-
I'm going to go turn on upstairs real quick so I don't miss out on the start. Thank you.
That's why I thought you want to go.
Yeah. We got a ton of top pictures right there.
How many guys showed up tonight? You said 20?
This is more people than we expected. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started here. My name is Arian Evans. I've been around the AppSec community since the end of the 90s. And so this is kind of a new interesting area for me because most of the last 15 years I've been focused on vulnerabilities in source code or inside of applications. And as part of setting out to figure out what bad guys are exploiting our apps now and monetizing, we've kind of dipped into this whole new threat landscape of malvertising and malware applications. We'll talk about that in a bit. So my background is coming from the AppSec side of the house, and this is James.
How you doing? I'm James Plugger, so I'm the head of research over at RiskIQ as well. So basically my focus has been on a lot of security on the defensive side. So it's been mostly on detecting things, so a lot of network-based intrusion stuff, as well as random ways to help prevent attacks or so.
So that was us. I'd like to get an idea of who's in this room. And we're really unsure the demographic, which will influence what we spend most of the time on. So who here actually manages an AppSec program for an organization? One person managing the SDLC guidance? Okay. Who here is an actual AppSec pen tester or source code review person? Who's an app designer or developer that's looking for info on more secure coding? Who here is a consultant Does a little bit of all of that. Okay. So who are the other 2/3 of you? So I'm curious, are there any other titles that are here that I missed, or roles and responsibility? Yeah.
Malware detection on websites, malvertising.
Oh, so you're actually into that space. Okay. So we have a whole mix here. This would be interesting. So this actually wasn't the presentation I built for OWASP. I had another one about the SDLC, which is, I guess it turned out to be as boring as the subject sounds like. Meanwhile, we were collecting this data, and James and I and others have been working on building this app, and we submitted it probably to force ourselves to put this data together. And we're surprised to find that the votes for this are actually much, much higher, probably because it's a new topic, and possibly because it's so complex. So this looks like more of a tennis shoes than a sport coat crowd. So I'll stop there, so don't get worried. I'm not getting messed off. So a quick outline, we're going to go through mistaken assumptions. Those are mine, not James's. When we first got into analyzing the internet and organizations and collecting this data, I walked in with some very boring assumptions. We're going to talk about a general malvertising overview and then the study we did this fall on malvertising campaigns and data. We're going to talk about some high-tech examples. We're going to talk about low-tech examples. And then James is going to walk you through the ad ecosystem and explain why this is so complicated. And then James, depending on our time, will take you through some campaigns and show you how they're distributing malware and how they obfuscate and hide it behind all these layers and what we call TDSs. So mistaken assumptions I made, this is horrible, I can't see either here. Mistaken assumptions I made. First of all, I thought web malware attacks are primarily custom and sophisticated. And this is because what I've studied so far, what I've talked to or worked with organizations about are things like Aurora or Shady Rat. They were very highly sophisticated, like long-term, sometimes state actor campaigns. I also thought that the mobile threat landscape was similar, and that I thought most of what's going on mobile in terms of compromise is driven around malware, or just misuse of privileges and permissions that can be abused. I thought ad network attacks were mostly brute force, and things like cat pictures, signatures, or email. And basically, I thought this stuff was only for people like my mother. So, you target people with really good defenses like Google, you got to be super sophisticated. You target my mom, and then this, I didn't really have any data or understand it that much. So, what did we actually learn from data after we got done collecting this? What we found is that web malware attacks are vast and varied. That's probably not too surprising. What we found actually was probably even less surprising was that low-tech attacks trumped high-tech sophisticated attacks, but just by orders of magnitude, exponential. Like when we chart them, you can't even see the high-tech attacks versus the low-tech attacks on a bar graph. The mobile threatscape is actually huge, and it's more similar to the malvertising threat landscape than like highly technical, sophisticated attacks. It's really not about malware. And certainly there's a lot of privileged mistakes out there with legitimate applications, but it's a small fraction of what's out there. And so, for example, does anybody remember the snapping that happened to Snapchat last year? And a lot of news and media about it. So we were like, well, why is this so challenging for them? Like, why can't you go out there and just kind of remove some of the rogue stuff and lock down your API? And we went out there, and our initial look, we found roughly 674 applications that were impersonating Snapchat, just in the mobile stores alone. And then we found far exceeding that on the web. We just quit counting on the web. So the lesson there is like, okay, well, Snapchat, they can secure their own app or maybe do things. There might be a few apps out there with malware. I think we found 2 or 3 with malware in them. But the general problem is this huge amount of stuff that's just doing brand impersonation. Is there money to be made in this? Years ago, Jeremiah and I and another gentleman put together some presentations. We went out and researched the web and said, how much money are people making exploiting web applications? Like this Get Rich or Die Trying presentation. We're pretty amazed to find people were making it into 7 figures. And I didn't realize this ecosystem had matured that much. So when we went out, we found examples like Eurograbber. The group behind Eurograbber has done a couple of campaigns around malvertising and fake apps, predominantly mobile because they targeted Europe, and mobile apps are big in Europe. And essentially, they made banking apps like a mint.com. They made apps that looked nicer, more highly functional in some cases than the banking apps. So they were compelling for the user experience, but unlike Mint.com, they actually weren't funded by legitimate parties. So once they get a critical mass of users, then they would siphon money out. So that the Eurograbber campaign alone, they made 47 million. In Ukraine's interior ministry, the group split between Ukraine and Russia, they estimated it stolen over 250 million in the last 3 or 4 years. So there's like serious big dollars out there in these campaigns. And the other thing I found out is that it actually isn't just this high noise to signal shotgun approach of like, dancing animated cats and gifts for email kind of stuff. They're actually very sophisticated ways they target. So the people who are using Malvertising and in a similar concept mobile, but particularly with Malvertising, they're actually becoming parts of the ad ecosystem, and they'll go out and actually buy demographics and they start inserting ads. For example, I can go out and profile 50-year-old white males who drive Cadillacs, are upper, middle class, have a lot of cash in the bank, that have a high likelihood of downloading the Tulsa Wanamaker gun show discount apps, right? If I throw down out there a large, like probably, spend a lot of money to get maybe a 0.001% who'll even download it. Look at that thing, and a tech-savvy user knows that a cash-only gun show isn't going to take a mobile app discount. So you need a fairly unsophisticated person with cash, etc. Point is, you can profile all these specific demographics and very cost-effectively go after this small target with a high likelihood of exploit access. So it's really an optimization network. So Malvertising overview. Malvertising, we believe, is the fastest growing and least understood attack vector in the AppSec world today. We've seen an exponential increase in campaigns just in the last year. We know that attackers are getting away with substantial amounts of money. The organizations we deal with, the vast majority of folks we talk to, there's no real tools to measure and manage the Malvertising space and in general the whole mobile landscape and rogue app landscape. And what I mean by that is, I said we touched on this, you have really 3 kinds of applications you care about. You have things that you own that you know about, and then any of you do pen testing or an AppSec program that your company also has a marketing department. You have things that you own that you don't know about, and no one tells you about, that you have to figure out where they are and find them. And then you have a third thing out there, which is rogue applications that look like yours, but aren't really your applications. Those could be rogue ads, rogue mobile apps, so classifying those is tough. And the problem's big enough, the US Senate commissioned, put together a commission just to try to investigate this because of the amount of financial fraud going on with it. So it's a pretty big deal. What's the problem? I mean, this is a pretty basic slide. I think you get it. The online advertising infrastructure was shockingly not built for security. So
You guys can hold out. I mean, hold your breaths.
So, and there's very little regulation. In fact, there's really not much in the way of governance or tools in the entire online advertising. I mean, some of the people who are behind some of the online advertising networks, there's a certain amount of fraud that's in part of their business model. So it's hard to police something that has a lot of shadiness going on in it inherently. And the danger there is really, all the layers we'll get into later mean that anybody can put malvertisements on any website at any given time. So sizing it, well, all the free internet, we know a big chunk of it is powered by this infrastructure. In terms of dollars today, it's a $545 billion industry and growing pretty rapidly. So there's a lot of dollars in there. I mean, very small percentage to siphon off to make a big difference in your lifestyle. So what do we find when we went out there as far as the attack vectors that people are using to target customers and users? So what we found were the top 3 things are actually fake software. So, instead of going to hack a secure application, many organizations are getting better and better at securing their applications. It's much easier to compromise the user by giving them a fake application. And especially with the presence of open APIs on the internet and all this, if you get the user to log into a fake app and point them at an API, it is now the legitimate client, web or mobile, that they're using for this. So fake branded software updates was number 1. Fake generic software was number 2. Fake antivirus software was number 3. And then the technical exploit kits, the high-tech attacks, were 4 and 5. So we didn't even put 4 and 5 on the bar graph because you can't see them on the lines. The difference between fake branded software and a technical exploit kit used. So that's pretty fascinating. And so what do we mean by these in example? So brand impersonating fake software, typically, so you could have a fake application, web or mobile for like a Snapchat site, or more often a fake software update. People are used to updating now, download, updates, could be a security update, whatever. Generic Trojan software presents like this. You just get some arbitrary executable. You get some ad, you come to a site, maybe you're trying to get a discount for Progressive Insurance, and it's like, do you want to run this thing? They don't even try to be smart about it. It's just
So we actually seen that on the Mozilla download page.
So the Mozilla download page.
So you go to Mozilla.org and you expect to download Firefox, and in the background, an advertisement shows up with a Firefox setup executable download. It's exactly what you're expecting on the page that you're expecting it, and because it's delivered through an ad, you have no idea. You have no idea that it actually is malicious. I mean, how do you explain that to your grandmother or your mother, when you're trying to clean up their computer? Like, don't download things you don't know from the internet, and they've just downloaded it off of Mozilla's website. So it's very difficult for some of these things to kind of identify and really figure out. And then you add the layers of complexity inside the ad ecosystem on top of that, and it just becomes a nightmare trying to figure out, where it came from.
So we're 15 minutes in, so we'll get through this. So we can get to the example. So one suggestion I do have here is if you are dealing with your mom or grandmother and they go to the Firefox site, just tell them, make sure you only download and run the right Firefox executable. Fake AV software, I was surprised how well these things work. I typically, kind of ignore that whole world, but clearly it works because there's a ton of it. And then, what was the one you told me about that they're doing now? Oh, it was. Yeah, so James pointed out that the thing that's rising now, so they've kind of been milking, the crap out of the fake AV software. So the new campaigns they're running are, you have fake AV software, so this will remove the fake AV software we got you to download last time. Because we're here to help. I really didn't have a lot of value in this presentation other to express my ignorance at the beginning and talk about what I learned. Now we're going to get into the more technical part of the presentation, and I'm going to hand it over to the
Questions or to the end?
if they're real quick, because
What does Smart Screen and Google Safe Browsing do to all that?
good question.
Yeah, so real quick, everything that we scan with our system, we actually submit to Google Safe Browsing. We've noticed on average that we pick a lot of this stuff up way before Google Safe Browsing picks it up. So we actually see sometimes it'll be a week, sometimes it'll be 2 weeks. It just depends on what it is. They normally pick it up, but there's a lot of stuff that we see that actually doesn't get picked up by Google Safe Browsing. We've been trying to work with them on enhancing their product, but it's kind of a difficult thing. There's so much stuff out there that it's very difficult to deal with. So, does that answer your question?
Sort of.
Kind of, sort of. Okay.
So yes, it is helping slowly. But I mean, the amount of stuff out there, I mean, the question is how much you're moving the needle.
Yeah, that's a block list. Smart Screen says, no, don't install that if it's never heard of it.
Yeah, and that's the big problem. I mean, we submit a lot of stuff. We're in for the top 5 ad exchanges. So we scan a lot of ads every single day. So there's a lot of data that they get from us regarding new campaigns that are going on. So a lot of times what will happen is we'll block an advertisement inside an exchange. And then what will happen is, it'll be blocked in that exchange, but they'll move on to shadier and shadier ad networks or ad exchanges, and then they'll display it. And hopefully by then, we've given a few days where we've blocked it with some of the larger partners, and then by then, hopefully they've blocked it inside Google Safe Browsing or something like that, and it kind of diminishes the effectiveness of their campaigns. So I don't have raw numbers, to show how that's helped with that, but a little done sometimes can mean a lot. So
let's get into technical examples.
Yeah. So one of the things that we had, and he mentioned it earlier. So the fake software, these social engineering attacks, they're literally 90% 95% of the problem that we have in the advertising ecosystem. Some of the more advanced examples that we have, that really kind of were big last year were both Angular as well as the rig exploit kits. Now, does everyone understand what an exploit kit is? I'm kind of assuming that most folks will know what that is. Angular targeted a lot of Silverlight, Flash, and Java, so pretty much anyone that was running some sort of vulnerable version would be affected on that. They kind of go after the lowest hanging fruit first. So if there's Silverlight, they'll pop it. They'll move on to Flash and Java. So a lot of times what we'll have is basically Angular will be a landing page. There will be a traffic distribution in front of it. So what happens is these guys, similar to the ad ecosystem, they want to target very specific browsers. So there's a distribution system in front of it, and basically folks will, say, if it's an OS 10 box, don't even send it to the exploit kit. If it's, a Linux box, don't do that either. I only want, Internet Explorer 8 with these plugins, and then it'll go to that specific exploit kit. They can also do things like, I only want folks that are based out of the US or Europe or something like that, where it's some sort of other demographic that they're looking for. And then they'll kind of push those guys to those kits. The other thing that we saw a lot of was the rig exploit kit. And it's basically like kind of an evolution of a couple different other kits. Sometimes this stuff gets misidentified pretty often, but a lot of times what this is it's a Crimer as a service sort of thing. So you pay them, an X amount of dollars per month, and they'll host it for you. You don't even have to maintain the exploits. You just basically drop the payload, and they load it onto people's systems. So there's some kind of interesting stuff there, but I'm going to skip through that. So real quick, to understand the ad ecosystem, really helps you understand advertising. We mentioned earlier that this ecosystem is such a huge and complex thing that there's so many different points of entry. Right here is probably the simplest slide that I can give you guys. So if you look at this slide, basically the money flows towards the right. And on the far right, we have the audience, which is basically somebody at a computer viewing an ad. They get an ad display. Now, the publishers are going to be your sites that run the ads. So they're going to be your web applications, your, Flappy Birds, Angry Birds, whatever. They're going to be the guys that have this ad space that they're trying to sell. And normally what they have is they have some sort of ad server that then hooks up to a supply-side platform. And the supply-side platform basically says, I have this grouping of websites. So, whether it be a tech site, game websites, things like that. And then they offer their inventory for sale on an exchange. And on these exchanges, you can think of it as like NASDAQ or the stock market. People say, I want to spend this much money on advertisements. And people say, I'll sell you this much inventory for this amount. And they have a thing called real-time bidding, which I'm not going to really get into, but it even makes things much more complicated. Normally, what they do is they have some sort of optimization, which is when you get into demand-side platforms. And then there's ad agencies as well as the actual end advertiser. So, basically, if I'm an advertiser, I spend my money with an agency, and everyone else gets a little cut of that money, from every point down. And depending on what sort of targeting you're doing, so if you're targeting like a middle-aged, person that's going to a gun show in, Kansas or something like that, it's going to cost a lot more money than, let's say I buy crappy traffic and I want to display like, 50 million impressions or something like that over the course of a month. That's going to cost me a lot less money than, very targeted demographics. So that being said,
So before we go on, let's go back to that slide.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions about how this flows? Not at all?
Yeah, just one question. Where does your company come in? Are you after the agency?
so our company actually, we do a lot of stuff. It really depends on what sort of things the companies are. We actually can sit anywhere in this, pretty much past the publisher, between the DSP and the publisher.
We're scanning the internet, doing discovery on all this. And then,
Paid by the agencies?
We don't do work with the advertisers or the agencies. Pretty much anything past the DSP is. Do we?
Yeah.
So I lied.
so
Sorry.
there is,
I'm a big fat liar, I'm sorry.
So is it only the advertisers, the slot where the malware comes from, or is it some of these other guys in the middle and just?
so there's actually tiers in here. There's multiple paths to get from here to here, is where it gets tricky. So if the most cost-effective or the direct relationships and the most profitable, actually the cheapest for you if you're a bad guy is to go through the exchanges, but it's the least value. You know, think of it as you have some.
Oh, and the big difficult issue is, once you get closer to the publishers, you have to spend more money to get displayed. So let's say I'm a small mom and pop company, and I have like a $2,000 budget. I could be an advertiser, go to an agency and say, spend this $2,000 in this market, and they will do that. If I went to a publisher, like let's say I went to a big site like Huffington Post or something like that, they're gonna laugh me out of the room because they're dealing with $300,000-$400,000 deals. Like if you don't have more than that, they aren't even gonna sell you anything. So
it depends in the sense that some sites, think of it as real estate. If they have a property for that day or even that minute that they haven't had a direct relationship with, they'll work back and throw it on an exchange and you can buy it last minute. So some of the bad guys are buying up last minute real estate as it comes on the market super cheap. That's the random shotgun. You know, I mean, they can dial it in a little bit. Some of the bad guys are coming back here and buying data here to figure out where to enter to optimize. They're paying a lot more money, but they know the return is much higher. They might be getting a 1 or a 10% return as opposed to a 0.001% return. The bad guys can enter in anywhere in here. We're out monitoring all this on the internet and then trying to figure out the attribution amongst other things. But the bad guys can enter at multiple phases in here, which is why it's very important to figure out what that chain is. And then it's hard to point the finger, because if you get this guy to clean up his act, they might just come in over here. So,
Are you identifying that the actors are going through the entire life cycle, or are you identifying that they're actually compromising a specific node? So like attacking the ad server, penetrating that environment, and then distributing it, or?
So here's the thing. We've seen everything. Like we've seen folks where they've compromised the ad servers. We've actually seen on the supply side platforms where they've compromised like the optimization stuff. We had like last year, actually early 2014, where a huge supply side platform company, they got breached and we're serving up malware just everywhere.
we're monitoring as virtual users.
Yeah.
We've got proxies all over the world and browsers all over the world emulating users all over the world. And we have to be very discreet about this. You can't come at it like a vulnerability scanner. So bad guys, most of them are very sophisticated. So if they realize who you are, just like saying don't show this bad thing, right? They try to minimize who sees bad stuff so they get a high likelihood of exploit. If you're like, that was a problem with Dacian, why they struggle. The minute they figure out who you are, you're not going to see anything bad ever again. So.
Well, my question's along the same line. So how much are you seeing Black Hat SEO fitting into this, right? And how do you differentiate between the two? I mean, 3 years ago, LA Times was hacked, right? And they immediately said, oh, it's malvertising. But then everyone said, no, you're dishing it up. And they went and looked and said, oh, no, it's still malvertising. They went back and looked again, and it ended up that they were owned and they were dishing out Black Hat SEO.
Yeah, and I'm trying not to turn this into a sales pitch or anything like that. I'm on the research side, so I typically look at the data. Our main thing is we actually have our own browser, so we can actually see the exact call chains that occur. And what we have is, so we track over 27,000 different ad networks and exchanges. So this whole market, like from everyone running like their own OpenX server to huge exchanges, we track all of that stuff.
So the answer is we have a pretty good sense of attribution on that. based upon tracing the whole call chain. So people go, oh, no, it wasn't. And it's like, well, no, it's, yeah.
Yeah, it is coming, yeah, I got it.
Yeah, and a little later, assuming I have time, I can kind of go through and kind of show you how those call chains look. And we can actually go through and identify some of these different components, assuming we have time. I can. Okay. So, real quick, unless there's any other questions on this slide. Everyone good? Okay, cool. So I just wanted to go through and give you guys kind of a really funny example of a really stupid, low-tech thing that actually works. So we scan a bunch of different top sites, and obviously some of the top sites are, adult themed sites. And what we see on a lot of the adult sites is we actually see this. And what it is it's a browser locker. And what they're trying to do, you can see the awesome English over here. Attention, your browser has been blocked up for safety reasons. All the actions performed on this PC are fixed, period. All the files are encrypted. Audio and video recording in progress. So, obviously these guys don't speak English as their first language. It's kind of funny. There's some other really awesome text in there. Basically what they're trying to do is find folks that are visiting porn sites, and then they're trying to convince them that they're somehow caught by the FBI. The FBI, NSA, whatever. They pretty much throw everything in there.
And you guys saw the story like 5 or 6 days ago. He was a young kid. I couldn't believe this. And he killed himself.
Yeah, I mean,
17-year-old.
And
Was he 17? I think it was younger.
Yeah, maybe they were still in high school, but yeah, to 14.
So, and basically what this does is it locks up your computer. You can't do anything, because what it does is it actually puts about, I think like 60 or 80 different iframes in it. That all it does is lock it up and say, enter this money back number. It's kind of interesting. And this is really dumb. It works. They wouldn't be running these ads if they didn't. So it's kind of an interesting tidbit. I can show more detail on that if anyone's interested, but I'll really quickly go into another example that we have, which is actually going to be focused on the traffic distribution side. So a while ago, what we ran across is this TDS that we named, it's called video ad banner is what we call it internally. So the problem, so a lot of the exploit kits, they have names. You can easily identify them. They have different, control panels that you can identify. You can, purchase them on the web. Now, the traffic distribution systems are a little harder to find. There's a few very common ones like Signature TDS, things like that, but normally these are ran as software as a service sort of models. Basically, you pay for a certain amount of traffic, it goes to these things, they send you traffic. So what we ended up doing was doing a little bit of a deep dive on this thing called Video Ad Banner, and we noticed that there was like 4 stages of this TDS, and this was pretty explicitly optimized for the Malvertising. The first stage was this index.php. The next stage was you would be redirected to this form, and it was this banner.js. And then the third and fourth stage, basically what happened was it pops you over to banner, and then it sends you off to this video.php. And then what it would do is redirect you to an exploit kit. And sometimes these exploit kits would be different, but we knew this was a kind of a paid-for service, based off of all these different indicators. And we saw this coming through a lot of different websites. I'll go through it real quick. We saw, evidence of this redirection service back in March of 2014. So this thing's been going on for a while. And it's kind of interesting because most folks don't talk about it. They talk about the exploit kits, they talk about the sites that are hacked. They don't really talk about what goes in between. So it's kind of interesting. At least from my perspective, I hope I'm not boring everyone else. So we knew that, back to March and April of 2014, that they had a bunch of different websites. And what we ended up doing was we tracked down through some of our data. Since we have this huge crawling infrastructure, we have all sorts of IP to DNS data, and we were able to kind of trace the IPs as well as the name servers that they use. We were able to find the WHOIS registration information because we do a lot of WHOIS lookups as well. And we were able to kind of track this static infrastructure. What we were noticing was the infrastructure stayed the same. So this traffic redirection system basically was up all the time. And to our points earlier with Google Safe Browsing, what they would do is they would block the exploit kit. The exploit kit is blocked, but this thing that's driving the traffic to the exploit kit never gets blocked. So this thing stays up for months and months and months. And it just keeps sending all this nasty traffic to all these different places. And there was probably like, we noticed like a ton of different infrastructure. I'd have to look up all the stats on that. Like we noticed like with this specific infrastructure, there was at least like 35 domains that we're using for the actual TDS itself. Most of the domains were actually through GoDaddy registration, and they didn't have privacy protection, which is kind of nice because we can, find other domains that are registered with the same email or potentially the same name. We also noticed that the infrastructure was hosted. I'm sorry for not having this in a more clear manner, but we noticed the infrastructure was hosted pretty much in the same place as well. So they were using a lot of LeaseWeb, they were using like secured servers, Namecheap, stuff like that. It was kind of interesting. So it was really, really easy for us to track. And the other thing that we noticed was there was a huge amount of cloud components. So these guys were actually using Amazon AWS S3 for their hosting. So what was happening was you're hosting these redirection services to all these different bad actors. So basically right here what we see is this is the part of the traffic redirection service. And basically what they did was this initial part was used to send the ads in. So this right here was the TDS, but this is how they got the ads in there. And it was basically, in this particular example, these malicious ads with Angular exploit kit were run on Huffington Post. So, it was kind of interesting. These are large websites that were serving up malware to all of their users that were vulnerable.
It's possible.
Yeah.
Does this make sense as far as the exploit chain, what they're doing here? I mean, it's really about redirection. This is the middle tier, what we're calling the TDS, the traffic direction service, is like the business logic layer. The back end is the exploit, the front end is the presentation. And these middle tiers, they're using, Amazon to make it initially look good, and then they have all these layers. So basically, a tool looking at every call in line would see the call chain. But if you're out there crawling the web or trying to monitor for this stuff dynamically on your own websites, et cetera, you have to build a DOM and emulate a full user and be there. You have to be in the bad neighborhood when the bad activity happens. And you have to be able to walk the whole call chain like a real user in a real browser would, which is why other scanners can have. If you're not building a DOM and doing this, you'll never see this other stuff like a user would.
Yeah.
This kind of like redirection chains, is this legit behavior for legit ads, or is this stuff that you only see in bad? Like I like set a CSP for my ad and say when I'm serving an ad in iframe, you can't leave ads.yahoo.com.
Yeah, so there's actually a few different things that you can do, like some of the CSP and like the script execution stuff. The big problem is folks use JavaScript down the line in these ads so much. They use it for like anti-fraud that it's almost impossible to get an advertising company to buy your inventory if you're restricting how they're tracking it, because they're just going to assume that you're doing some sort of fraud. So, it becomes really difficult until like there's some sort of browser implementation that gives us the flexibility to allow tracking but disable things that are outside of specific, because you would have to have CSP on every single component here, that basically says don't touch my DOM, like don't play with it. So it's very difficult.
In this example, you could just block AWS.
Yeah. And the
Fairly
thing is
like
right
legitimate ad inventory going to.
Yeah.
Then you have another problem.
Yeah,
It's block AWS, which is why it doesn't work for people.
So I mean, like in this example, what this is actually there was an R2B, so a real-time bid that was won, and that's why you see the redirection back to Yahoo, and then the malicious ad service. So I can answer questions later on if folks want to hit me up on those specific instances. I can go through some of our data and hopefully give people a better understanding. So, okay, I'm going to blow through these. These are just some of the other infrastructure that we saw that was used with this. And one of the other things that we did notice with this is it wasn't just, exploit kits that were being used. There was things like Windows may be running slowly, fix your Windows installation. And basically on one side they're infecting a guy, and then on the other side they're trying to sell him some sort of thing that'll fix his Windows box. So, this is
Not like
again,
Microsoft got the
yeah. So, this is just another example of AWS being used inside these ads that were malicious. If folks, I've got basically about 5 minutes left. Are we good for a brief example?
Who's time check in the room? Yeah, what are we at? We have until, so the other one doesn't start at 2:45?
Yeah, it does start at 6:00.
Right, so we have what, 10 minutes then?
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to briefly run through this example real quick then. And I'm going to bring up that live example of just kind of the multiple tiers. Just because I know folks. Yeah. Okay. So, let's see here. So, in here, I apologize for the explicit names on here. Obviously, we'll not bring up any images here, but what this is it's an adult site, and you can kind of, I'm using this example because it's an excellent way of visualizing the different components of the ad ecosystem. So right here, basically you have this is a publisher's website, right? They're selling the ad inventory, and then what we have here is an ad server. So if you can imagine, we're working basically right to left on this. A user would go here, they would be displayed an ad, and right here they're selling it through their ad server. Then what happens is it goes to an exchange. And this exchange then sells their inventory to these guys, this ad host net right here. And then pretty much from here down is malicious. So in this example, what's going on here is you have a malicious advertiser. It's very simple. They pretty much went to this ad host net and they said, hey, I'm an advertiser. I want to buy ads from you guys. I want to advertise my product. And boom. Malware inside the page. They either didn't do any scanning or something like that on this ad host net, and then they sold it at an exchange, and then the publisher displayed it on his website. So it's kind of a really straightforward example of how these work, and you can kind of see. So in this, we have a sequence overview. If I were to pull up the actual, all the different pages, there's literally hundreds of resources on here, and with this, we can actually see exactly what was requested by which component. So hopefully that helps folks kind of understand a little better with that. And I'm really not going to go any further, so I figured I'd ask folks if there's any questions at this point. So let's turn it over to questions.
At the end, somebody is handing over money, buying ads, and saying, here's my malware, go display it. Why can't that be tracked back by calling the money?
So the big problem is it can be if there's some sort of accounting issue. Now, the ad, like we alluded to earlier, this whole ecosystem wasn't designed for security in place. So there isn't somebody out there that's going, are you who you say you are? There aren't those sorts of things. And if you go to an advertising agency and you sell ads directly to, you say, here's $1,000, I want you to run this content. A lot of times the ad agency is going hey man, I need to make my commission. I don't really care if this guy is really who he says he is. And there's no regulation right now that basically says who's responsible or who's liable for any of that bad ads.
Well, I'm sure it's a lot like the hosting where it's stolen credit cards and.
There is some of that, but honestly, what's happening a lot is folks have the traffic distribution systems, and what you'll see is the traffic distribution systems will buy the ad space, and then they basically sell traffic from these ads. So it's not necessarily, the traffic distribution guys, they can kind of go like, hey man, we didn't know that they were exploiting these guys, we're just selling traffic. And a lot of times, what it is really shady traffic, like traffic exchanges, where you're going to share 10,000 impressions between different sites. Like there's a lot of that within the adult industry where they basically share traffic between each other's sites. So the idea is I tell you that I'm going to put an iframe on my site, and you put an iframe of my site on your site, and we both basically double our traffic. So there are some sort of things like that that are somewhat legitimate, and I use that like with giant quoting fingers. I would never allow that.
So in a nutshell, I think what you find is the vast majority of this marketplace is just starting to feel some impact and care. So you have, like in finance and insurance, they've been burned by this. These things can lead to users having their AV or some corporate tool block them from using this site. When they say, oh, your site's infecting me, I can't get there. Then there's impact and loss. Then they're going back and walking this chain going, who's burning my brand? Who is infecting my internal users or compromising my customers and blocking them? Like once there's that pain point and people care, and then their problem is, well, there's not many tools to even find this and find attribution. You have people like, Huffington Post who probably don't really care, right? And all the people in between that are making a few cents or a few bucks off this, they're not being held accountable, so they don't really care. Like if there were a wall of shame out there and people knew like what's the top 10, or if it got bad enough that Huffington Post was then like blocked in Google Safe Browser, then they're going to care. But until there's like a wall of shame, or if you work with an organization that starts getting burned by this, then you're going to care and you're going to start looking for your brand in these sort of attacks. Does that kind of make sense? So I think it'll help straighten itself out as it becomes more visible and more people get burned and start demanding accountability. But right now it's a new and exponentially growing frontier because of the lack of accountability.
Yeah, I think you mentioned that benign or legitimate ads use anti-fraud done in JavaScript. Is that kind of custom per ads agency or something, or could that be at least whitelisted somehow?
So the problem is it's very custom per ad agency. There's a lot of stuff in the back end as well as the front end that basically verifies that it's a legitimate click or a legitimate impression. And the problem is, it's kind of one of those things where, every ad agency and ad exchange has their own secret sauce, and there's no incentive for them to work together. Because at that point, they're helping their competitors fight fraud. It's kind of one of these things where it's like, if my ad exchange is like very fraud-free, then I'm going to get more traffic. It's kind of a competitive advantage, if you will. So.
And likewise, if people know what you're using to determine what's fraud, then you can cut it through.
Exactly. And to be completely honest, is there anyone in the ad industry in here? Okay, I'm so sorry.
I work for Facebook, so.
Oh, okay. Well, you're okay. You guys are okay. You go to Affiliate Summit, which is one of the big advertising conferences, which just happened last week. It is amazing what these guys think is okay to do. These guys are basically going around and saying well, they have my browser plugin, so they're my bots, or they're not your users anymore on Facebook, they're my users because they have my browser plugin. So I'm gonna plaster ads all over Facebook or something like that. And it's just amazing. So.
And the same thing stands for the mobile ecosystem with the rogue mobile applications. And in general, the propping up, some of this stuff is also used to redirect to rogue web apps. So it's, again, it goes back to that question of you have things you only know about. They probably aren't attacking your users and customers, hopefully. If they are, you got a much, much bigger problem. There's things you own you don't know about that marketing has propped up. Hopefully those are okay, and partner stuff. Then there's all this rogue stuff that's impersonating a brand, and tracking that is the exact same problem. And the hallmark of impersonating a brand, or that watermark, usually indicates it's up to badness, which is targeting their users or customers with malware, with phishing, it's skimming money off the top of a transaction, etc. But for me, the way I conceptualize it is once you see these acts of impersonation going on, that's your first sign that somebody's up to something bad that they're going to monetize, or get your user creds and use that to get in.
And then I think there was one last question, and then I think we're done.
Yeah, just a quick comment. I think it actually is in the advertising industry's best interest to cooperate, because the next step after that is a kind of a scorched earth approach when they just start installing ad blockers.
Agreed, and it's definitely, the question was basically, or the comment was, it's definitely in the ad industry's best interest.
And do you have analytics on what percentage of ads are being served are laced with malware?
So we do, but I don't have them off my head.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I mean, that, we do, it's actually, so we were looking at trending it, but most of that data is relatively new. So about, ask us next year, and I think we'll be able to give much better data and trends. A lot of the signatures, because we figured out what they were doing, I mean, some of the signatures for this are as recent as September, December.
More like yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, we're still adding
signatures. We push signatures on a very consistent basis.
But you brought up an interesting thing. You've got the scorched earth. As this gets worse, people install ad blockers. I don't know what the percentage is. There's a lot of unsophisticated users who still don't and can't manage that.
It's 12 million on on Firefox's ad block. It's like 12, it's a lot.
But of people on the internet, 12 million is still a fraction. But yeah, so that grows. That's one way. The other thing you made me think of is in terms of things you install client side. I personally always had a dislike of arbitrary code on my system. So toolbars always seem evil to me. They slow down your system, but I never really thought about it much. And as we got into this and we're analyzing, another lesson that I learned out of this I didn't put up there, that's not obvious. Toolbars are from the devil. They're evil, but they're worse than you think, because some of these folks, so they want to hide. And one of the best ways they can hide from anybody trying to find them is with a toolbar. Because then you have the toolbar installed, and we're not scanning the internet with the toolbar installed. Well, we're starting to now. And we don't publish details about the virtual user and the emulation we're doing. And the reason we're not publishing details is because if you're one of those people, we don't want you to figure out how we're finding you. But so we go around, well, one of the things they figured out is just get the toolbar in. And what they're doing is having this toolbar, when it hits the right site and the right ad, it'll dynamically download a piece of code, execute it, do whatever it is on your machine, then delete it, wipe the log file, and go back to a benign toolbar. So at any given point, if you do source code review on the toolbar, it's this totally benign, nice, safe, acceptable thing. It can get passed. And we're expecting to see the same kind of things with the mobile apps too. As they have trouble getting them in stores, they'll just put up benign apps, maybe especially in the Chromebook world, where they can dynamically update. But yeah, just keep in mind your toolbar can hit the right ad and trigger, download a piece of code, execute it in the full privilege process of the browser, then dump and wipe that code. So when you have to do forensics later, there's no trace of it.
Do malware guys show up at places like this?
I can tell you for a fact they do. We've had a couple of instances where...
Good or bad?
Bad.
Yeah, we have seen on a few different mailing lists where the malware authors are actually watching.
I would be if I were them, but I'm not.
We've actually seen where they're watching open source signature stuff. They're watching places like VirusTotal, they're registered. They're paying for little tiny accounts, things like that. So it's definitely something that they do. And we've actually seen a couple of Russian gangsters at certain conferences, newsrooms. That's it. So I'm James, and this is Arian. We're both at Respect You. Thanks for your time.
And they still don't know what we do.
What's that?
And they still don't know what we do.
We cluster them.